Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar on racial and economic equity, what the data says, and what to do about it with Laura Dresser and Erica Nelson. This is Tom Banke with Forward Community Investments, and we're excited to have you join us for today's presentation. This presentation represents the third installment of our monthly webinar series on racial equity. Before we get going, I'd like to take this opportunity to share some background on how we got here today. Forward Community Investments has been serving the state of Wisconsin for over 20 years. FCI transforms Wisconsin communities by supporting organizations and programs that reduce racial, social, and economic disparities. Community, partnership, inclusion, and equity. These four words represent what we value most at FCI. In 2013, we sought feedback from nonprofits, investors, businesses, foundations, community leaders, and citizen activists around the state to better understand the critical issues communities are facing and learn about how we can work together to create a brighter future for Wisconsin. Last year, our board approved an updated vision and mission that reflect what we've heard from these partners and make explicit our commitment to transforming Wisconsin by making communities fairer and more just. Our mission is to be an investor, connector, and advisor for organizations and initiatives that reduce social, racial, and economic disparities in Wisconsin communities. Our vision is an equitable and inclusive Wisconsin that is built on cooperative social action. With the help of BMO Harris Bank, we are able to offer this series of webinars to provide partners with tools and approaches that can be used to advance social, racial, and economic equity and inclusion within their work at no cost to you. BMO Harris Bank is an active partner in Wisconsin communities and demonstrates strong corporate citizenship as an important part of whom they are and how they approach communities. Volunteerism and corporate responsibility are a key part of the culture at BMO Harris Bank. It's how they demonstrate their commitment to and invest in the communities they serve. At this point, we'd like to go through some housekeeping slides. You can join the webinar using the telephone number provided in your confirmation email that was sent to you from GoToWebinar, or you can use your computer's speakers, which is recommended by GoToWebinar. We want to make this webinar as interactive as possible, so we will be taking questions throughout the webinar, and you can submit them using the chat or questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, we'd like to launch the first poll of today's webinar, which asks, what is your role in your organization? So you're going to see a couple of choices that are going to be listed on your screen. Okay, we're getting some folks in here. So great, we're seeing a couple folks or everybody enter there. We got about anywhere between 70 and 75% staff, 13 to 15% executive directors, some funders, and then some other folks as well. So thank you so much for participating in that poll. There will be more to come as we get going. And then secondly, the chat feature on the GoToWebinar interface, we'd like for you to share what is the name of the organization that you are representing. And we're seeing some folks enter that right on the right-hand side as well. I would also like to take this opportunity to mention if you are calling on the phone, to please actually mute your phone if possible. We are picking up a little feedback and things like that, so it would be greatly appreciated if you could do that, and it will enhance the experience for all attendees. Great. Okay. Now that we've got those out of the way, let's get into a little bit more information about our speakers. Laura Dresser is the Associate Director of COWS, a labor economist and expert on low-wage work and workforce development systems. She has both written about ways to build stronger labor market systems and worked extensively with labor, business, and community leaders in building them. Laura has written Low-Wage Jobs, Care Work, Inequality, and Labor Market Reform. A co-editor of the Gloves Off Economy, Workplace Standards at the Bottom of America's Labor Market, she is currently working issues on connections between quality care, quality jobs, and minimum wages. Erica Nelson is the project director for the Wisconsin Council on Children and Families Race to Equity project, which developed the original outline and design of the Race to Equity initiative in late 2011. Nelson also serves, when time allows, as a private bar attorney for the Wisconsin State Public Defender's Office. Before her return to Dane County in 2011, she practiced public interest law for 3 years at the Center for Family Representation in New York City, providing legal counsel and representation for low-income parents in abuse and neglect cases in Manhattan Family Court. Based on her New York work, Nelson has served as an advocate welfare. Laura and Erica will help us ground the concept of racial equity in Wisconsin-focused data. Our speakers today have both been at the center of important, rigorous, evidence-based work in Wisconsin that has helped put a spotlight on the magnitude and nature of the challenges Wisconsin faces when it comes to racial disparities, also bring an understanding of why this is an important issue, and to think about ways we can advance racial equity in our state. In addition, Laura and Erica will also explore the latest and best data available on key issues
Yes, hi, this is Erica, and I too am thankful to FCI for this opportunity to have this discussion today about racial and economic equity, and honored to do so alongside Laura, and thank you all for coming and participating in this discussion that we will have today.
Okay, look, it's 2016, so Yahoo, we're going to start off with the most exciting webinar you've been on this year. We're going to have a few polls going through this process, so I want you to keep your eye on the polls. We have 3 questions to kick off with, right, Tom?
Yes.
So how do you feel about your economic situation in 2016? How do you feel about the state and its economic situation in 2016, and what are the words that best describe your community? Go ahead and answer those poll questions while I do a little bit. We said we have 3 parts of the webinar. Tom already announced them, so that's just to remind you that that's true. One of the things we'll be drawing on here is the State of Working Wisconsin that the Center on Wisconsin Strategy, COWS, produces every year for Labor Day. This little map holds the highlights of the results, highlights or lowlights, depending on how you think about the economy, but the most important results. And I want to just highlight 4 key issues in the Wisconsin economy that frame and shape and kind of inform thinking about racial inequality and racial justice. And so I'm going to try and go fast, and you're going to know that you can go get the State of Working Wisconsin and read any of this that didn't make sense. We'll also have questions in addition to the poll questions. We'll do some questions each at the end of each section. Will allow you to type questions into the chat box if you have questions for us, and Tom will edit those or, select those. So again, if you get confused or want a little more information, we can try and fit it into questions, but also remember that there's a lot of resources online. So the three issues I'm just going to hit hard right now. Long-term wage stagnation is this. If you want to think about the Wisconsin economy, you have to kind of think about what's going on at the middle. What's going on at the bottom gets defined in a way by what's going on in the middle. When things are bad at the middle, things are really bad at the bottom. Long-term wage stagnation is about the median worker in the Wisconsin economy, the one that is paid, if you line everybody up by their hourly wage and you turn all the salaried workers into hourly wages, so this is all workers, not just hourly workers, you line them up in a row from lowest to highest wage and you take the one in the exact middle. That's the median wage. The median wage today is $17.40 an hour. That's up about 70 cents from the median wage, inflation adjusted, in 1979. 2 cents an hour increase over a 25-year period, 35-year period, and that stands in contrast to the way the American economy grew in the post-war period, and really defines that stagnation at the median, defines many things about family income in this state, and people's sense of opportunity for their kids, what they see as possible looking forward, given they made so little progress over the last 35 years. That's the problem at the middle. There's also a problem at the bottom, and that is the problem of low-wage work. More than 1 in 4 workers in the state earn too little to keep a family of 4 out of poverty with full-time, year-round work. Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Oops. We both hit the button. Sorry. So that's the bad jobs issue. 730,000 workers all over the state, not just teens, not just second incomes. These are starting wages, but these are long-term career wages for many workers stuck in that $11.55 per hour or less. Those jobs come in bad packages. I say bad jobs come in bad packages. That means when you have low wages in the first place, you are less likely to get regular, predictable hours and full hours. You are less likely to get any sort of benefits, sick leave, let alone health care. So that's the issue, bad jobs. And we often think about the economy generating these problems because of globalization or technology. But if you look at low-wage jobs, it's really just a question of inattention to the bottom of the labor market. These jobs, food service jobs, retail jobs, healthcare, hands-on healthcare jobs, which is the biggest boom, these jobs dominate the economic growth that we've had lately. They are local, they are non-tradable, they are not particularly impacted by technology. They're booming, and workers in them don't do well. They do not make enough to have their family get by. That's where the boom is. And that leads us directly to extreme racial inequality. And this, Erica, I'm going to let Erica really take on, but just one piece of evidence that I summarize here is in 2014, 1 in 5 Black workers in the state was unemployed. And when I say 1 in 5 Black workers was unemployed, and you think to yourself, oh my gosh, that's nearly 5 times the white level, you should be thinking about the Great Depression. You should be thinking about Greece right now. 1 in 5 is crisis levels of unemployment. And that is what the state has. That ratio, that 4.6 times, is more than twice the national ratio. So consistently, and Eric will show this, but just consistently, Wisconsin's Black-white inequality exceeds the nation's by 1 or 2, sometimes even more times. So with that, we hand it over to Erica.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to take a few moments here to sort of talk about the racial economic disparities between African Americans and whites in the state, as well as Latinos in the state. And if you want more information and more data, we have raceequity.net has a report called Race to Equity, a baseline report looking at racial disparities within Dane County, but also does a statewide and a national comparison as well. So we're going to just take a few minutes here and look at unemployment, child poverty, median household income, and graduation rate. So to piggyback on what Laura just said, in the state of Wisconsin, the African American unemployment rate in 2014 was almost 20%. And that is higher, as you can see in this graph, higher than Missouri, higher than Georgia, higher than Mississippi. And you know, the white unemployment rate for 2014 is about under 5%. Notably, when you think about African American unemployment, these numbers leave out two significant groups within the African American population in the state, and those are those African Americans who are underemployed, working part-time, as Laura said, in sort of low-wage jobs often, and the disproportionate number of African American men who are incarcerated. And the side note to that is that the state of Wisconsin has the highest African American male incarceration rate in the nation. So those individuals are not counted here. Now, if you look at the Latino unemployment rate, in this graph we have Dane County, but really we're focusing on Wisconsin. The unemployment rate for Latinos is about 11.6%, and virtually sort of on par with the national Latino unemployment rate. Now, high unemployment oftentimes leads to high poverty, and that is also reflected in the percentage of Black children and Latino and children of color living in poverty. So here in the state of Wisconsin, 51% of African American children are living in poverty. That is higher, significantly higher than the national average. And again, and as an aside to this, in March of 2014, the Annie Casey Foundation released a report called Race for Results, which indicated that Black child well-being on over 12 measures is the worst here in the state of Wisconsin than it is anywhere else in the nation, and our Black child poverty numbers reflect that. Looking at Latino children living in poverty in the state of Wisconsin, it's about 36% as compared to about 12% of white children. So high unemployment, high child poverty among communities of color as compared to white children. And then when you can look at median Black family income in the state of Wisconsin, that's about $29,000 for an African American family, as compared to almost $70,000 for a white family in the state of Wisconsin. And again, for African American families, this is significantly lower than the median family income for Blacks in the nation as a whole. And then if you look at the Latino median household and family income, for the state of Wisconsin, the household's $32,000, and the family is about the same for Latino families as compared to white families in the state of Wisconsin. So there are many indicators that continue to reflect this sort of crisis, as Laura said, and I absolutely think that's the case. We are at a point here where our racial disparities within the state of Wisconsin and the well-being of our communities of color is at a crisis point which we need to address aggressively and urgently. And then I will hand it back over to Laura to talk a little bit about families, schools, and community.
Great, but now that you're depressed, there's two things we want to do here. One is that we want to poll you, and we've just realized
Hello, sorry about that. Looks like we had a little technical snafu with that, and we apologize for that, but thank you so much for bearing with us. And we were just about actually to launch one of our polls, and then that was the data presented. Yeah. Okay, so I will launch that one right now. Please enter how you feel things are going so far.
So the question is about the data presented, and we just offered you that small email break. I'm glad you all, I'm sure you used the time to its best use. We're back now. So go ahead and answer that poll, and let's see. And this is from the answers we have so far. The question is this evident in your community, or seems more like other places in the state, or surprised me? And I know those aren't perfectly, you know, there's a Venn diagram with some overlap there, but seeing that about 90% of the people on the call answering this poll are saying pretty evident in my community, that's good to hear, because that means you're seeing things that the data says are going on. 7% or so saying other places in the state. This is, depending on where you are, it's certainly much more evident some places than others. Surprised me, another 6 or 7%. So great. And we're also going to let you, anytime you want, you can be putting a question in the chat box, or also just note one fact that surprised you the most, or that you're going to remember from this section. Go ahead and type that in the chat box, and you can be talking to your other participants about what was memorable. I want to move on to the question of family, schools, and community, and what this this extreme inequality, growth in bad jobs, and long-term wage stagnation looks like at a community level. And for this, I found no better single expression of what this means at the state level than these maps from the Department of Public Instruction that show in 2001, that's the one on the left, and 2014, that's the one on the right, the share of kids in public schools that count as economically disadvantaged. Let me say a few things here just in case any of y'all are feeling like, huh? One, no, the definition of economically disadvantaged did not change over this period. It's basically qualifying for free and reduced lunch, whether you get it or not. It's almost two times the poverty line. It's 185% poverty line, of the poverty line for a family. And that's who is judged in this category. On the left, in 2001, 1 in 5 kids in the state were economically disadvantaged. By 2014, it's 43%. And you can see, and the reason I like this is because it's very hard to get very good data at the local level. And what you can see here, because this is good data at the local level because it's by school district, you can see that the decline in income, the struggles for families, are spread all across this state. They are in urban areas and rural areas. They are in conservative areas and liberal areas. They are in resource extraction and dairy areas. They are all over the state. We have seen more or less a doubling in the share of kids in the schools that are disadvantaged. And I think that's important a couple ways. One is, it's important to realize that over that period then in the classroom, the number of kids who are facing, you know, real stress at home on the income front has doubled, even as we have cut back on the number of resources we have in our schools, cut back on the number on the support we have to keep classrooms small, etc. So even as we have moved to much more need in our schools, we have moved away from really funding that need. So that's what this picture shows, and I think that kind of shows it for maybe somewhere, for some of you who felt like maybe we're talking about somewhere else, this shows it for maybe your community.
Okay. So taking that, when you disaggregate the graduation rate in the state of Wisconsin by race and ethnicity, you see great inequities and significant difference in outcomes. So looking at Wisconsin, Wisconsin's graduation gap was one of the widest in the U.S. And the graduation rate for white students was 93%, while graduation for African American students was 66%, and then Latino students who did not graduate on time within 4 years, 22%, almost 22% did not graduate on time. And it's interesting because one of the things, you know, Laura and I are talking about, and they overlap, and maybe they feel like they're contrasting because of the prior map, in terms of the vast geography, the vast difference in circumstance in terms of changes in students that are economically disadvantaged. And yet, when you gather data in the aggregate, you know, the state of Wisconsin has some of the best educational outcomes in the nation. And then when you disaggregate by race, we are again, at a point where we are the worst and we're at crisis. And of course, you can't separate graduation rates and school performance from our economic circumstances for those same communities. Without, you know, a high school diploma is extraordinarily important, but as you know, secondary education is becoming increasingly more important to achieve stable living wage and stable communities, etc. And if you're not graduating, you're not going on to secondary education, and then you're not participating back into your local economy or the broader state economy. And so there's an indication of where, you know, the other indicators outside just the economics, but in terms of education indicators, health indicators, justice and juvenile justice indicators are all sort of working together. Strongly correlated to race and color. So disadvantage becomes highly racialized. In other words, lots of people, when I talk about this, say, well, aren't we talking about, you know, isn't this just a class issue and not a race issue? But I think evident from the data here in the state of Wisconsin, and even more so when you look at, you know, more local communities like Dane County, these two things are inextricably linked. So when you have this link between poverty, poor outcomes, and race or ethnicity, what you have is not necessarily that racism itself caused these inequities, but rather the continuation of these disparities and these inequities has the potential for fostering stereotyping, profiling, and differential expectations based on color, which will exacerbate and deepen an already dramatic racial equity challenge. And in addition, these economic and racial inequities, as I sort of alluded to before, as Laura has stated, have a negative and harmful impact upon our educational outcomes and our state and local economies generally. And unemployed and underemployed families are less able to gather or have the resources at their disposal to foster long-term stability, which again influences education. Instability in neighborhoods and individual families often has a higher potential of having youth or children enter the child welfare system or enter the juvenile justice system or adults entering the criminal justice system, also strongly correlated to poor health outcomes for those communities. And then more, and Laura's going to talk about this a little bit more in a few minutes, but you know, as we talk about jobs and low-paying jobs, in certain sectors of the state and certain economic development areas, in particular, locally for here, and my knowledge around Dane County is that we have a highly credentialed labor market, requiring high levels of skills, undergraduate degrees, mostly graduate degrees, and so there's a need to sort of address the funneling of jobs, the skills, the training into what's relevant to our local economies, so that people are more able to take on those positions and have those more stable living wage jobs. So now I think we'll take a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, we have one poll to do now. What are some words that best describe your community? Growing together, divided with areas of opportunity and economic isolation, or trying to figure it out? Go ahead and fill that poll question out. And while you're doing that, I just want to kind of pile on to what Erica just said, because I think sometimes when thinking about race in the state of Wisconsin and why we are so off the charts and in a state of crisis in terms of black-white inequality in this state, people often feel pretty defeated that maybe this has always been the case, and this is inevitable and, you know, unfixable. You know, if you look at 1979, actually Wisconsin was a relatively good state for blacks. African Americans earned more than the national average here, worked more than the national average here. Everything was flipped. And why was it flipped? Because of economic opportunity. But these two things go together, and Erica's slide does so well to talk about the way these things mix together, and that the loss of that economic opportunity worked especially brutally against the African American community in this state. So yes, manufacturing was lost in Wisconsin across the 80s in certain ways, but it was really the black community that took the most brutal parts of those losses, and that has turned into a set of situations that have left us looking like a southern state as opposed to an industrial state in outcomes.
We are showing the results from the last poll, so that is available for everyone to see.
Okay, so we have, again, 10% of you are trying to figure out what's going on. That's great, because Erica and I, well, I will speak only for myself, being a geek, I love it when people are trying to figure things out. Means you're going to be reading lots. So please do. 87% say divided with areas of opportunity and areas of economic isolation. And 2% of you say growing together with shared prosperity, and I'm happy to hear that's going on or somewhere in the state as well. So now we're going to go to the closing section. And here, oh, I think in the chat box, let's just try getting some ideas in the chat box, both things, real stresses that you see in your community or real opportunity that you see in your community. And you can just type a plus and then put a good thing, or a minus sign and put a bad thing in the chat box. Just good things you see in your community or bad things you see in your community. Also, you can be asking questions in that chat box. But now we'll go to the third section, which is the what to do.
Yes. So, and just to add on to what Laura said a minute ago, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, and that is that with respect to the Great Recession that we're coming out of, the Great Recession disproportionately hurt communities of color, and consequently that has impacted employment and job opportunities. But also in terms of the recovery, African Americans in particular are not recovering at the same rate that whites are within the state with respect to the Great Recession. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Now, moving toward greater equity in the state and the local level in 2016, you know, it's really important to acknowledge that there are a lot of factors at play. This is not, none of this is simple. It's all particularly nuanced and can be complicated, and there's a lot of factors. And, you know, race matters, and that's really important to acknowledge. And it matters in so many ways in terms of a historical context and a community context. So place matters, class matters, local and state policy in terms of economic policy, education policy, health policy, all of that matters, and a community's culture also matters in how to address that. So those things all need to be incorporated when thinking about how to address it, how to move forward. And from my perspective and the Wisconsin Council on Children and Family and Race Equity's perspective, there are 3 areas of focus to move systemically and institutionally towards greater racial equity, both locally and on the state level. And that is really thinking about a 2-generation approach, one that not only focuses on the well-being of children and improving child outcomes, but also thinking about the role that parents and families and guardians, adults play in the lives of children. Their stability, their reduction in stress, their health is, again, inextricably linked to the well-being of children. So enhancing employment and earnings is absolutely critical. That looks at skills, job training, living wage jobs, mentorships within particular communities, rethinking human resources practices when you're hiring, et cetera, looking at, you know, the diverse pool, thinking about diversity and inclusivity when you are hiring in your organization and also in your community and community involvement. So enhancing employment and earnings for the underemployed, unemployed is absolutely critical. And then once these individuals or these folks are employed, we can't just think that, oh, you have a job and now everything's great. People need high quality child care, they need transportation, they need housing. These are all items or things that are critical to stability. And when these are in place, it's much more attainable to assure student success in school because they're not moving around, because there is stable housing. The family or the community is less stressed. So we consider those the 3 pillars of focus to move towards greater equity. And it's not only, you know, the nonprofit world, but it's government policy, it is federal policy that influences this. This is the corporate and private sector that influences this, you know, and school districts as well, all play a part. So now we'll pivot to Laura.
And these are, I mean, this is really just an echoing in a different font of many of the same ideas that Erica just highlighted. And so I think I won't really dig into these so much, but I want to emphasize what she just closed with, which is that this is in everybody's hands. I think too often we feel like the only place to make a solution is in what feels like an impossible policy environment, political environment, or the only place to make a difference is inside that private sector institution or that public institution, something that's away from you. But there's stuff that you can do, and I think that's the kind of one theme that we want everyone to walk away from this, with that sense that there is something you can do, whether it's just figuring out what's going on in your community or figuring out what's going on in your organization, figuring out how opportunity runs through your organization out into the community, how you're helping change what opportunity looks like in your community, even raising the floor, which everybody thinks of as a classic federal policy issue, the floor being the minimum wage most commonly thought of. But think about your community and how you pay human service workers. Is there something you need to do about raising wages in human service work or childcare work? Is there a way that your community could come together around thinking about what the floor under wages in your community is, or how, for example, labor law is enforced? So do workers know their rights? Do workers know that they should be getting paid the minimum wage and have certain rights to defense of that? Systematically extending opportunity is more familiar to all of us, you know, thinking about how to do that and focus, you know, and I guess I'll just, you know, close on that. Really, in this state where race is so clearly a defining feature, the negative impact, the negative outcomes for African Americans is a defining, unique feature of the state economy. We really have to focus on changing that. It will not change by looking away or pretending we're like everyone else. We have to focus on it to make a difference. So the first step, in a way, is admitting we have a problem, and we've got to get past step one.
I think, you know, once in your community or your place of influence, or you identify an area of focus, whether that's in a systems or institutional reform or local county policy, and changing policies which are, you know, low-hanging fruit, so to speak, that is within your control to change. I think some of these principles and values help inform those efforts. And, you know, so we say, you know, think authentically about engaging the families and the communities most affected by these disparities and identifying and implementing the solutions. You want the lived experience, and you want people at the table. You want everybody at the table. You do not want to create dynamics where you are telling folks how to do something or what they should be doing, et cetera, but rather it's a collaborative and inclusive work towards having discussions about what the problems are. You know, don't make assumptions, but engage the families and communities most affected. Like I said earlier, our approach needs to be a two-generation one that supports under-resourced parents and intensifying investments in at-risk children from cradle to career. You know, we can spend, this is my 2 cents, we can spend a lot more money in education, and I think we should, but if our communities and our families aren't strong, that's only going to get us so far. And that's very important, and that investment in those resources are important, but we cannot just stop there. And that sort of leads to the next bullet, which is our programs and our services need to be woven together into a more integrated whole. It has to be more comprehensive and collaborative, not siloed. You know, suspension rates, for example, which are disproportionately African American youth experience suspensions over white students, that influences the role and the disproportionality of African American kids in the juvenile justice system in the state of Wisconsin. The higher rate of juvenile justice system involvement has a higher rate of and likelihood of involvement in the adult criminal justice system. Many of these sectors cannot be separated. They are they're cross-influencing and impacting one another in their decisions, and so being comprehensive and collaborative is absolutely key when thinking about making change. I also think that investments in money and time have to be more effectively targeted towards those communities or groups or individuals or what have you that are in the greatest need. Right? It doesn't make sense to make a policy that you constantly say is for everyone when you're trying to reach a particular group of people. Not all policies reach all people. People's experiences, their cultural backgrounds, their histories, their geographies are different, and that has to be recognized. And it's okay to target particular policies to improve the well-being and outcome of particular communities. It is not being politically incorrect or inequitable. And lastly, given sort of the depth and breadth of the problems that we've sort of generalized and described here today, our response has to be driven by a sense of urgency. We need to be addressing this head on right now, yesterday, and consequently, we also have to recognize that lots of these numbers are not going to change overnight. This is, you know, a long-term commitment. You can't just check the box on addressing racial equity. This is a lifelong commitment, and it will, in order to achieve true equity, it'll take a generation, it'll take decades. I'm not saying not to be hopeful. I think that we can certainly make progress, but it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It has been historically, and with respect to African Americans, our history in the country of slavery and segregation and redlining and all these sort of factors that have been in play, institutional and structural racism that has been operating, does not dissipate over the course of 5 years. But that's not to say that we can't aggressively chip away at it and make progress. So those are the principles and values that I think about when addressing the racial equity challenge. And also, I come to this work from a social justice personal perspective, but I also think it's really important that if it's not a place of moral and social justice in terms of equity, it should certainly be something that you're driven to address from an economic perspective for the health and the well-being of our state and our community. It is, in fact, the smart thing to do economically, because all of our communities need to thrive, and the long-term social, cultural, and economic fate is wrapped up in addressing this equity. So 2 quotes to leave you with: a community is not resilient if it is not equitable, and not everything in the world can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So, hopefully you got some good information and some nuggets on which to sort of think about.
And I think Tom has a few questions for us, perhaps, that have come in over the question box. So thanks for those. We have time for a couple questions.
Yes. Okay. So, like I said, we've been receiving some of these throughout the presentation. So one of them, what local, zip code, municipality, school district measures of disparity can local officials access and evaluate? Do you know of any resources?
Zip code level is hard to get. The most precise geographic area that's going to have samples that you can trust are the DPI data on school districts and even schools within districts. And so DPI data is the universe. It isn't just a sample, right? And so that, especially to look at economic disadvantage, is one of the places to go, and you can get that by race as well at the school district level. Beyond that, a city has to be pretty substantial, basically Milwaukee or Madison, to generate sufficient size, and that's generally at the county or MSA level. So I would say DPI is going to be the one source that you can drive down to a more local level. The easiest source. There's a few others, but that's the best.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions, if that's okay. One of them is, has the increase in the economic disadvantaged population between 2001 and 2014 affected the graduation rate in general or among particular groups?
So this is the interesting thing about that graduation over time. I haven't looked exactly at 2001 and 2014. I know we hold steady at the front of the graduation rate pack, given our relatively decent performance, actually pretty good performance of white students, even though we've seen a lot of economic disadvantage increase across the last 15 years. And I think that's something that the schools have done well. They've maintained that rate but underlying that decent rate that we generate at the statewide level, driven partly by the high share of whites in our population, underneath from 2001 to present has been this very high disparity between African American kids, Latino kids, and white kids in the schools. And so I think that the economic disparity has grown because the median, because of that long-term wage stagnation and because of the boom in low-wage jobs, et cetera. And that is not increasing the inequality. That inequality has been underlying this state since 2000.
And I think that, you know, it's probably fair to say that going back to the racialization of disadvantage, that in some circumstances and in some schools and communities, and I feel fairly confident about saying it, is that there are lowered expectations based on, you know, race or ethnicity for African American and Latino students within these environments. So the expectations are lower, and the environment and the culture within the school and the resources available, even though, I mean, so even though a white kid and an African American kid could be in the same economic circumstance, it's more likely that the white kid's going to graduate than the African American kid, and that is where race and poverty are, you know, or expectations and outcomes are actually, in fact, linked in this state. So.
Great. Thanks again for all those questions. We've got a few more. We've got some time. So this one was interesting. The South African government requests all corporations pay 3% of their profits toward corporate social investment. That helps to correct over 350 years of discrimination. What is the U.S. or Wisconsin corporations doing to assist and correct this injustice? Or are you aware of any?
No, I'm not. You know, there are obviously there are corporations who have taken on equity issues in different sorts of ways, in exemplary ways, but we have not, as a matter of policy, ever demanded something like that. And it feels politically far off, but kind of delightful.
Oh,
we can do 2 poll questions.
What's that?
We can do 2 poll questions unless.
Sure. I do have about 3 or 4 more questions, okay, or if you would rather do the polls, we can do that. Do the questions. Okay, great. Let's see here. How do we address the unemployment within minority groups when all groups have high unemployment rates?
I think that, you know, this is a hard question. It's a harder question in 2008 than it is today. It's a harder question in a community that's lost a lot of jobs, take Janesville, for example, than in many communities. The state unemployment rate is now back down to 5% overall, and that means that, at least in terms of the balance between workers and employers, there are opportunities in general. When unemployment is high, it's, you know, it is just harder to get everyone in the line. That's absolutely true. But the situation in 2015 is simply different on the demand side. There are more jobs. It's not enough jobs. It's not enough jobs to drive wage changes. It's insufficient demand, but it is a better situation. And I think that we should think hard about tolerating incredible inequality in unemployment when unemployment is high, but not when it's low. I mean, it's an intolerable disparity, whatever the level of unemployment. And so we should always be trying to reduce that. It's just easier today than it was 6 years ago.
So I was thinking about Laura's response. So can you repeat the question again, and then I can go back to.
Sure. Let me just.
How can you get people jobs when the unemployment rate is high?
Exactly. Yeah. So let me.
Well, I mean, I think that in particular, depending on your local region and where the jobs are, there has to be a focus in terms of training people, creating relationships with employers, in which when someone's trained, at the other end, the expectation has to be that there's opportunities to be hired. And I think, again, this goes back to sort of targeting, like the healthcare industry, for instance. Are our job training programs and our resources going into those programs where the jobs, in fact, are? You know, technical colleges and participation in technical colleges and the skilled trades. There's a lot of jobs in construction. I mean, we have to be thinking about where the jobs are and what are we training folks for, and are we giving them the skills that they actually need and what employers are looking for, too. I think it has to be again, it can't be siloed. There has to be these cross conversations between what's happening locally and what's happening in different regions of the state, and what's demanded and where the jobs are in order to address the unemployment.
Okay. Well, I think thank you so much for everybody's questions and creating this very interactive webinar. Please join me in thanking Laura and Erica for their excellent discussion, and of course BMO Harris Bank for their support. The presentation that they shared was so valuable, and as with all of our webinars, the recording will be made available for playback from our website. We will be sending out a follow-up message to all registrants with links to more resources from the presentation and the app, and also the link to where you can view the recording of the presentation. I would encourage all participants to review our website at forwardci.org for more information on how forward community investments might help your organization. Our next installment of our webinar series on racial equity will take place on Tuesday, February 9th, with Curtis Ogden of the Interaction Institute for Social Change with his presentation entitled Love, Power, and Networks, Building an Equitable Regional Food Economy and Community. You can register for this webinar and find more information about it on our website. This information will also be included in your follow-up message. One last note, when you close your browser from this session, you will be directed to a very concise questionnaire to evaluate today's webinar. Please take a few minutes to complete this evaluation to help us continue to improve the effectiveness of these offerings. Once again, I'd like to thank BMO Harris Bank for making this exceptional learning opportunity available, and please stay warm.
Thank you.
Bye.
Happy New Year.